All right. All right. Welcome to our Thursday evening New York Giants Preservation Society meeting with Bill Lamb. Bill is going to be discussing the origins of the Giants ownership group. And he told me offhanded that he could not condense that into the ownership up until the Giant moved to San Francisco. He preferred to do it in halves. So he's going to do one part tonight, and then he's going to come back later in the spring or the summer to finish up.
Gary, can you hear me?
Frank, I can hear you, but now I can't hear you. Next week's meeting is going to be with Kurt Smith. And for all of you on here, just so you're aware, next week is Holy Thursday and Good Friday and Passover. So we're going to hold a meeting on Wednesday. And the Giants are playing the Padres that day. And it's a 4 o'clock game. So the meeting is going to be Wednesday at 8 Eastern time. This way, nobody would be rude to Kurt. He's not right. If he's talking and we're, giving out scores and saying Joey Bart hit a home run, much to Steve's chagrin. So that's what we have going on. I sent out a newsletter stating what our group is about. I'll send that out every couple of months.
Gary, you're competing with the Mets. You're competing with the Mets home opener, which you can see is on the television screen in the back of my room. It's muted, but you're competing with my guy's home opener.
Well,
continue, please.
Frank, you have a choice of watching the home opener or being with us, so you can decide what you like to do.
No, I can do them both.
Okay. Anyway, it is my privilege to introduce Bill Lamb. Bill, again, is an authority on the Giant ownership and especially the New York ownership. So why don't we give it up to Bill Lamb? Bill, the floor is yours. Welcome to the New York Giants Preservation Society, Bill.
Well, thank you very much, Gary, and good evening, everybody. I'm Bill Lamb from Meredith, New Hampshire, and I'd like to start by thanking Gary for extending the invitation to me, and to thank all of you for tuning in, particularly given the competition from the Mets game. The organizational history of the New York Giants is a longstanding interest of mine, and I hope that I'll be able to make this presentation worth your while. As Gary mentioned, I thought that to do this subject justice, I really should break it down into halves. And tonight, I'll be beginning with the founding of the team in 1883 and taking you through the end of the 19th century. And then if I haven't disgraced myself to the point where you won't have me back, I'll return maybe in June 9th, I think, Gary.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. And we'll go from the regime of John T. Brush through the relocation of the franchise to San Francisco after the 1957 season.
Bill, if I can interrupt for 1 second.
Yeah.
When Bill is done with that, Rob Garrett will complete the trifecta, and he will discuss ownership from the time the Giants moved up until present day. Bill and Rob are very good friends, and they worked on this project together. Bill, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, quite all right, Gary. What I don't want to be is a talking head for however long I'm going to be on. So what I did was create some visual images, but you people have been spoiled because the last couple of sessions you had my friends Steve Steinberg and Don Jensen on, and they know how to do visuals, and I don't. I come from the courtroom where I used to have a detective or a prosecutor's agent to do those things for me. But Gary has graciously agreed to be my AV man tonight. So what I'm going to do is simply ask him to cue some of the images we've created at the appropriate time and take it from there. Gary, let's try that out with image number 2, if you would, if you'd put that up.
Image 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go. The presentation I'm going to do tonight is derived from a 52-page essay that I did for Stu Thornley's Polo Grounds Anthology. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this book. It's excellent and came out by McFarland in 2019. A lot of the images, well, I'm gonna say a lot, some of the images that I've taken have been lifted from Stu's book, and also the earlier one, I don't know if you can see this, is The Land of the Giants that was published by the Temple University Press in 2000 about the Polo Grounds. So I'll be using those two books and others as source material. But enough of the background, let's get on to the organizational history of the New York Giants. New York Giants were founded in 1883 by John B. Day, a businessman who was originally from Connecticut. Day was a manufacturer of tobacco products who relocated to Lower Manhattan in the late 1870s in furtherance of the expansion of the business. And in addition to being a businessman, Day was also an avid baseball fan and even a player. He fancied himself a pitcher. And he would actually play for various amateur teams around the New York City area in his spare time. Now, the Giants were not the first professional team that Day founded. Day's first pro team was the Metropolitan Baseball Club of New York, the original New York Mets. And in order for me to go through the genesis of the founding of the Giants, I've got to segue a little bit into the Mets because the two are interrelated. There are two versions of how the Mets came into existence. Both involve Jim Mutry, who at the time was a shortstop of mediocre abilities, but a man of some organizational talent and real energy, then at loose ends in Manhattan in the summer of 1880. Now, according to Mutry, who, shall we say, did not have a reputation for being overly fussy about historical accuracy, he claimed that he had observed Day taking a drubbing, pitching for an amateur team one afternoon, and came over to commiserate on the bench with him after the game was over. The more likely story is one promulgated by the venerable sports writer Henry Chadwick, in which the meeting between Mutry and Day was actually arranged by New York City sports writers. Whichever is the case, Mutry had a proposition for Day, namely that if you will bankrupt an independent professional baseball team, I will recruit the talent and manage that club. This is the beginning of a relationship that will last about 12 years between the two men. And they'll work closely together. But it's important to understand that sometimes Mutry is portrayed as a partner of Day or his equal. And that is not so. Day was the club boss throughout this time. Mutry was an employee, period. But Mutry has to be given credit for the substantial contributions he made to the Giants during this, well, the team that'll become the Giants, over this period of time. But the two were not, partners or anything like that. Gary, if you would, I mentioned John B. Day. I have a picture of him. Can you pass? That's the next slide. This is a picture of Day taken around 1890 is my guess. Day photographs are hard to come by. The only other one is him quite a few years later. But at the time that he and Mutry got to get together, he was still a young man. He was only in his about 33 or so. And the team that Mutry recruited was taken from a team called the Standards. It was an amateur team, a semi-pro team, I guess I should say, in Brooklyn, as well as the recently disbanded Rochester Hopbitters. And the Mets make their debut. This team that Mutry has put together make their debut on September 16th, 1880, when they defeat an amateur team called the Unions from Brooklyn. And the game is played in Brooklyn, as almost all games were at the time. Even teams that had the name New York, such as the New York Mutuals of the National Association of 1876, actually played their games in Brooklyn. which at the time, as I'm sure you all know, was a municipality, separate and distinct from New York City proper. Matter of fact, Brooklyn was the third largest city in the country. New York teams have been playing in Brooklyn, occasionally elsewhere, like in Hoboken or up in the Bronx, since the late 1840s. But Day wanted to put his team in Manhattan, if that was possible. By 1880, however, there really wasn't any open green space large enough to accommodate a baseball facility. So when Mets began, I mean, they played as New York teams did in Brooklyn. But sometime during that summer, either Mutri or Day, or perhaps both of them, became aware of the existence of a large open grassland located just north of Central Park, between 5th and 6th Avenue and 110th and 112th Street, that had been used for a time by a polo club, but was now basically lying fallow. Importantly, the grounds were already fenced and were flat and very conducive to baseball. The grounds were owned by James Gordon Bennett II. Gary, if I could have the next slide. Excuse me, that's Mutri. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this previously. There's Jim Mutri, about 1886. As you can see, he's a handsome man, a bit of a dandy, and he cut quite a colorful image. He would sit on the, actually he wouldn't sit on the bench. He'd sit on the stands with a frock coat and a top hat, and he's quite the dude. If I could have the next one then. This is James Gordon Bennett II. He is the son of the founder of the New York Herald, who took over the paper after his father died in the 1860s. And he is an interesting character, a very dashing and eccentric man who basically ran the New York Herald from France, where he spent most of his time. And he would direct his editors and his workers via transatlantic cable every day. So I'm not really sure how Day and Mutri were able to negotiate a lease for the premises that he owned, this meadowland up on Central Park North. But somehow they did. And before the summer is out, the Mets now have access to this area that'll become the site of the original Polo Grounds. The first game ever played at the Polo Grounds takes place on September the 29th, 1880, when the Mets take on a team called the Nationals of Washington before a crowd of about 2,000 people and defeat them. From that point, they go on and play roughly 25 games and do quite well. I think the record was 16-7-1. And that record includes a game that Day himself pitched, a 15-6 victory over Manhattan College. This success really fires Day up. And he has now real ambition for this club. So what he's going to do is he's going to create an entity by which the team can be governed. It's a small corporation, 4 men basically, called the Metropolitan Exhibition Company. And Day himself will be the principal shareholder. Principal, probably a dominant shareholder would be a better description. He recruits 3 friends of his, a Manhattan coal merchant named Joe Gordon. I think we have a photograph of him, Gary, if that's the next one. There's Joe Gordon. Some of you may know him not so much from his time with the Mets or even as being a member of the board of directors for the Giants, but he was the first figurehead president of the American League New York Highlanders, later the Yankees. But he got started back in 1880 or 1881 rather, with Day as a junior member of the Metropolitan Exhibition Company. The other 2 guys that were involved in the I'm not going to that one yet, Gary. The other 2 fellows involved in the company were a stationer named Charles Dillingham and a ne'er-do-well son of a wealthy man named Walter Appleton. Mutri is not a member of the Metropolitan Exhibition Company. Rather, he remains the manager, an employee, so to speak. Now, in 1881 and 1882, the Mets play a schedule of over 150 games, which strikes me as really remarkable. They're playing semi-pro teams, independent pro teams like themselves. They're playing college nines. They're playing company teams. And they're also playing games against the National League and doing respectably. Out of 60 games, they actually won 18, which is not bad. The following year, they continue. Now they're a member of the Eastern Alliance, which is a professional league which is affiliated with the National League, and they win that league. They're also playing the National League on an exhibition game basis, and also playing games against the American Association, this new rival major league, which comes upon the scene in 1882. They again do respectably against the National League. I think they win like 29 out of 74 games, and they crush the American Association. They win 23 out of 24 games against the American Association teams that they play that year. What's interesting is at this point in 1882, you now have two major leagues on the scene, and neither one has a franchise in the three biggest cities in the United States. There's no National League team or American Association team in New York City, in Philadelphia, or in Brooklyn. And yet the Mets are a ready-to-order team playing in Manhattan, which makes them extremely attractive to both leagues. And both leagues offered them membership. As a matter of fact, they probably offered them membership the year earlier, but they had turned him down. But now he's ready. And somewhat surprisingly, he places the Mets in the American Association rather than the longer established and more prestigious National League. But within a very short period of time, he unveils a larger master plan whereby he is going to place a second franchise in the National League, an entirely new team separate and distinct from the Mets. This is the team that will become the New York Giants. This team is going to be crafted primarily from the core of the team, rather. It's going to be young, promising players from the Troy Trojans, a National League team that had just been liquidated. Gary, if you could flash the next, you'll recognize the players here. These fellows are coming down from Troy and will form the core of the Mets. You got Buck Ewing, the catcher. You got Roger Connor, the first baseman, Mickey Welsh, the pitcher. Also coming to the team will be John Montgomery Ward, then at Providence, transitioning from being a pitcher into a shortstop. Interestingly, the guy in the center, Tim Keefe, is also a Troy Trojan. He will also become a member of the, or an employee, I should say, of the Metropolitan Exhibition Company. But he's coming off a bad year with Troy, going 17-26. And he's not going to make the Gothams, as they're called, this new team. He's going to be relegated to the Mets, which basically is the, I won't say JV team, that's overdoing it, but they are the lesser team in the eyes of the Metropolitan Exhibition Company. The Metropolitan Exhibition Company has now got two clubs in Major League Baseball, one in the American Association, one in the National League. Day himself is going to take over being the president of the Gothams. That's what they're called. Like, the Gothams are the New Yorks. And this clearly indicates that this is the team that the Metropolitan Exhibition Company has its hopes on. The Mets become an afterthought. Joe Gordon, the fellow we saw in the previous slide, he's going to be assigned to become the president of the Mets. Interestingly, Mutry is going to remain with the Mets, whereas a fellow named John Clapp, who's a veteran of the National Association and the National League, he's going to come over and become the the field leader or manager of this new team, the Gothams. Despite the fact that the cream of the crop, as far as the playing talent goes, has been assigned to the Gothams, it's not going to work out so well. But the first problem I should probably address is now they've got two teams, where are they going to play? So, Gary, if I could see the next slide. There you go. You've got two ball clubs and space at a premium. So what the Metropolitan Exhibition Company will do is subdivide the grounds into two separate stadiums. And I want to give credit to Larry Zuckerman, who made this diagram. I lifted it from Stu's book on the Polo Grounds. So you've got two separate stadiums here. This newly created second diamond on the left side of your screen has its own admissions, has its own grandstand, and actually it's attracting a different clientele. The established diamond on the southeast corner, the National League grounds, this is the prestige team, the 50 cents general admission grounds that is placed in the National League and which gets the cream of the talent. The Mets are relegated to the American Association. They get the inferior diamond filled in by landfill dirt and stuff like that. It's only 25 cents to get into a game at the Beer and Whiskey League team, although I would hasten to add that alcohol was sold at both grounds, even though the National League had tried to prohibit that. Day sold liquor at both stadiums. And notwithstanding the intentions of the hierarchy or the organization, things don't work out. Tim Keefe, the cast-off, wins 41 games. The Mets play excellent ball and have a winning record. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Giants, the Gothams underperform. They have a losing record. They come in sixth, and they're a real disappointment. One of the things I should have mentioned, and I neglected it. If I understand correctly, there were about 12 occasions when the two teams played at the same time. In order to separate the two diamonds, they placed a temporary canvas fence right in the middle there, as you can see where Gary's got the pointer going. There are anecdotes about players from one game hopping the fence to chase long fly balls onto the field of another one. I don't know how true that is, but it's part of the stadium lore for the 1883 season. As I mentioned, that season did not go as planned. And 1884 was more of the same. As a matter of fact, the Mets, behind 37 wins by Tim Keefe and 37 more by Jack Lynch and some good hitting by the third baseman, Dude Estabrook, they win the American Association pennant. Meanwhile, the Gothams are floundering in the middle of the standings and disappointing the expectations of Day and his associates. Unhappily for the Mets, when they engage in the first postseason match between the two leagues that fall, they get swept by the National League Providence Grays in 3 straight games that were played all at the Polo Grounds. Hoss Radburn had coming off his 60-win season. He won 3 more that October. But what that did is this immortalizes the club as the answer to the following Final Jeopardy question, which is, which New York team was the first one to play in a World Series? And the answer, who were the 1884 New York Mets? Now, the inability of the Gothams to achieve the level of success expected didn't sit well with John B. Day. So over the winter, he orchestrated some moves. The first thing he did was transfer Mutry from the Mets to the Gothams. Then, via some rule-bending chicanery, he managed to procure the Mets' two best players, pitcher Tim Keefe and third baseman Dude Estabrook, for the Gothams. He also acquired yet another future Hall of Fame player for the Gothams that season. Jim O'Rourke came over from Buffalo. So as a result, the 1885 Gothams have got 6 future Hall of Famers in the prime of their careers in the lineup. And the result is a remarkable turnaround in fortune. This team goes 85 and 27 for a 759 winning percentage, which I think is the longest is the best or the highest winning percentage of a second place team ever. I could be mistaken, but I think it is. But it's not good enough because the Chicago White Stockings of Cap Anson, King Kelly, and John Clarkson are 2 games better. Meanwhile, the Mets, now having been stripped of their best players, are plummeting in the standings. They finished 7th, and basically they're on their way to oblivion. Something else likely happened in 1985, and that's when the New York Gothams became the New York Giants. The new nickname is often attributed to Jim Mutry, but Peter Mancuso, who is an authority on Staten Island baseball, which is where the Mets would end up, has done the research which suggests that the nickname was originally coined by a New York World sports writer named P.J. Donahue. In any case, if I could have the next slide, Gary. I couldn't find a photograph of the 1885 team standing. The best I could do is the 1884 team, but you can see them. Here they are. At the time, the average American male was a shade over 5'7". All of the Giants are at least 5'8", but not that much taller than that. The only 6-footers are, you can see John Ward standing at the end. Well, the fellow next to him is Joe Gearhart, the second baseman. He's a little over 6 foot. And over on the, standing on the right next to the guy in the straw hat is Padney Gillespie, and he's like 6'1½". The only real giant, quote unquote, on the team is Roger Connor, who's standing right there in the middle. He's 6'3", about 220 pounds. He's a real giant by anybody's standard. By the way, the person in the coat standing next to him with the mustache is sometimes identified as John B. Day. That one right there. I have misgivings about that, but that may or may not be Day. But in any event, from 1885 on, the nickname is applied universally, and the team is now the New York Giants. Later that year, over the winter rather, the Metropolitan Exhibition Company sells the Mets to a Staten Island Railroad man and entertainment entrepreneur named Erastus Wyman, who then relocates the team to his amusement venue in Staten Island, and within 2 years, the team doesn't draw, doesn't play, and folds. The 1885 to 1889 seasons are the glory years of the Metropolitan Exhibition Company. The Giants captured the pennants in 1888 and 1889, and they won the World Series against the American Association champs both years. Attendance at the Polo Grounds is really mushrooming. It goes from 75,000 in 1883 to 185,000 in 1885 to a National League record of 305,000 in 1888. And in 1889, the New York Times estimated that the 4 members of the Metropolitan Exhibition Company had reeled in an extraordinary, for the time, $750,000 profit over the 9 years that the company had been in existence. all of which makes what's about to happen to the Metropolitan Exhibition Company even that much stranger. Notwithstanding the success that the Giants have had on the field and at the gate, there's two large threats to their prosperity are emerging. The first is directed at the club's playing field. Now, the Polo Grounds are located in an upscale Central Park North neighborhood, and the large and often unruly crowds that are flocking there are deplored by the residents. And in 1888, sympathetic forces in city government adopted a plan to alleviate the neighborhood nuisance by running a street right through the Polo Grounds outfield. Gary, if I could have the next, there was a paper street that they could run right through from center to left. I think that'd be 111th Street. Now, the Mets got their lawyers to engage in some rearguard legal action that allowed them to finish the 1888 season and win the World Series. But it was obvious that this was a lost cause and that the stadium was doomed and that they were going to have to relocate for the 1889 season. Now, here's where Joe Gordon, the fellow who we showed previously, comes back in. He, in addition to being a coal merchant, had a real estate practice. He was very astute about properties. And he locates a property in far north Manhattan, close by the Harlem River. This property is flat, it's dry, it's located between 155th and 157th Streets, and it's bounded by a towering escarpment that will later become known as Coogan's Bluff. This property is owned by the ultra wealthy Gardner family of Gardner's Island fame. But negotiations to secure access to the grounds between John B. Day and James J. Coogan. Gary, if I could have the next slide. There's photographs of Coogan. He's another guy who's hard to find images of. They found her. And so the the Giants have got to begin the 1889 season in a decrepit stadium in Jersey City. They're there for 2 games. Then they switch over to the now vacant St. George grounds over in Staten Island that the Mets had used before Coogan and Day finally reach an agreement whereby the Giants get a 2-year lease on this property up in far north Manhattan. And what's remarkable is that within 3 weeks, the army of workmen that Day looses on the grounds have erected an unfinished but usable ballpark that'll become the Polo Grounds 2, or the new Polo Grounds, as they were called at the time. The other problem that the Mets, I keep on saying the Mets, the Giants are facing is the arrival of a third major league in 1890, the Players League. Obviously, we don't have time for an extended discussion of the Players League. Suffice it to say that the placement of a Players League franchise in Manhattan posed a serious threat to the National League New York Giants. Backing this new team were a pair of wealthy young baseball enthusiasts. Gary, if I could have the next slide. Edward Baker Talcott, he is the son of the Cotton King and a well-to-do stockbroker. The other side is Edwin McAlpin. He is the son of the founder of the American Tobacco Company, and he's another guy with a lot of money. Fronting the organization will be Cornelius Van Cott. He's the guy on the bottom. He comes from a family well-known in New York City baseball circles from the 1850s, but he himself has not much interest. What he has is the political clout that they need. He is the former postmaster of New York City and a heavyweight in the Republican Party, which is interesting. This group is mixed. Talcott is a Tammany Hall Democrat, just like John B. Day and the other members of the Metropolitan Exhibition Company, whereas McAlpin and Van Cott are Republicans, and heavyweight Republicans at that. The fourth member, the guy I don't have a picture of, is a Pittsburgh stockbroker named Frank B. Robinson, who reputedly was McAlpin's brother-in-law. These are the four guys that will finance this new Players League team that is going to menace the Giants. To really drive the threat home, Talcott contacts Coogan and arranges to lease a portion of the Coogan property, which is located directly adjacent to where the Giants have erected their ballpark. Gary, if I could have the next slide. Brotherhood Field, it's known, is right next door to the new Polo Grounds. As a matter of fact, the only thing separating them are a 10-foot wide alley and the stadium walls. This is going to make the competition for fans even more fierce. Worse yet for the Giants, almost all of their players, from John Montgomery Ward, who is obviously the founder, the brainchild, the man who gave the Players League its inspiration. He's going to go to the Players League. Meanwhile, Buck Ewing and Roger Connor, Tim Keefe, virtually all the Giants, with the exception of fading pitcher Mickey Welsh and outfielder Mike Tiernan, they're all going to jump over and play with the Players League team in New York. And Ward himself is going to move over and take over the Brooklyn team in the Players League. So what you end up having is a situation where you've got 5 major league ball clubs all playing within a long fly ball of one another. That's the National League. You've got the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Bridegrooms. And in the Players League, you've got the Players League version of the Giants, plus the Brooklyn Ward Wonders. And the American Association has still got a club, the Brooklyn Gladiators, which are a sad sack outfit that was created to give them a presence in the area. Now, this is going to spell disaster for all concerned. And the loyalties of the two New York teams were established right from the first day. On the first day of the season, over 12,000 folks will come to Brotherhood Park to see the Ewing-led Players League Giants, whereas only 4,600 will come to see John B. Day's National League New York Giants. And that's the way it'll go for most of the season. The Players League team will outdraw the National League team, but both of them will draw poorly. As a matter of fact, more than half the time, the National League Giants won't even draw the 1,200 fans they need to break even, cover their expenses for that date. Teams across baseball are hemorrhaging red ink, and the situation's untenable. And even before the end of the season, it's obvious that something has to be done. In the meantime, and unbeknownst for a while to the public, was the fact that the Giants are hemorrhaging money to the extent where they're on the verge of bankruptcy. In July, the National League held a secret or a private meeting where Day revealed that the club was on the verge of going under. And it's only a bailout orchestrated by A.G. Spalding, who is the principal owner of the Chicago White Stockings, that saves the club. Gary, if I could have the next slide. Spalding recruits Arthur Snowden, who is the principal owner of the Boston Bean Eaters, John T. Brush, who was then the head of the Indianapolis Hoosiers. Each of them kick in $25,000 to allow Day to stay afloat. To a lesser extent, Al Reach down in Philadelphia and Gus Abel, who was the principal owner of Brooklyn, they also contribute. And it's this infusion of cash that allows the the National League's cornerstone franchise to survive the season. But it's obvious today that he's got to reach an accommodation with his Players League rival. It's equally clear to Talcott that that the Players League team can't keep going either unless an arrangement is reached whereby they'll both survive. They enter into negotiations just as the 1890 season is ending and reach an agreement whereby the two teams will merge. This precipitates merger of various teams between the Players League and the National League. And in 1891, the team that emerges from these negotiations will be a National League team because the Players League is going under and will not survive to play a second season. Day is going to be nominally the president of this new team, but the real power is going to vest in Talcott and his allies. They have more stock than Day has. As a matter of fact, Day has even less stock than his silent partners in the National League. Talcott, for example, will exercise his influence behind the scenes. He'll be the one, for example, who will dictate where the franchise is going to play. He's on the hook for a 10-year lease for Brotherhood Park, and he's not going to allow that to sit idle. So the Giants, even though they have a new ballpark of their own right next door, they're going to play in Brotherhood Park. And the new Polo Grounds will be renamed Manhattan Field and will become the home of harness racing and college football and balloon risings and other attractions. But no Major League Baseball game will ever be played again in the new Polo Grounds. As the season goes by the next year, the team's still losing money. And in order to raise capital, they have to issue more stock, which Talcott and his allies then buy, which increases their leverage over the franchise operation. By the end of the 1891 season, they're in such control that Talcott can force the termination of the loyal Jim Utry. He's out. And 13 months later, so is Day. Day, he's now in fairly desperate financial straits. His business is also suffering. And he resigns as president, leaving the franchise in the hands of the Players League group headed by Talcott. Talcott is running the club, but he installs Van Cott as sort of the figurehead president. The following year, he lures John Montgomery Ward back from Brooklyn with a very lucrative deal. And Ward takes over the club. The first thing he does is dispatch the aging Buck Ewing to Cleveland in return for an untested young infielder named George Davis. It'll turn out to be a brilliant move with Davis at short and Ward at second, and the pitching of Amos Frusti. The ball club really revitalizes its fortunes, both on the field and at the gate. As they're playing better, the gate's improving. In 1893, they're back up to 290,000. And in 1894, they're going to set a new National League attendance record of 387,000 paid admissions to the Polo Grounds. And on the diamond, they're going to finish, God bless you, they're going to finish second and then defeat the Baltimore Orioles in the postseason Temple Cup. So things are looking up on both the financial front and the competitive front. But Talcott and McAlpin, they're not like John B. Day. They're baseball enthusiasts, but they're businessmen. And they expect a return on their investment. And they haven't been getting it to the extent that they had expected. So during the postseason of 1894, they become receptive to overtures that are being discreetly made by a young Manhattan millionaire who had quietly been accumulating random blocks of giant stock, often by means of a frontman. This is Andrew Friedman. If I could have the next slide. Now, baseball chroniclers have rarely been very kind to Andrew Friedman, the principal owner of the Giants from January 1895 to September 1902. Friedman has been described as arrogant, abrasive, bad-tempered, vindictive, and the most hated team owner in turn of the century baseball. All of which is pretty much true. But rarely acknowledged by critics is the fact that Friedman is also a man of formidable abilities. He's highly intelligent, fiercely energetic, and he possesses an absolute genius for making money. During his lifetime, Friedman will make millions in 3 separate endeavors. First, in Manhattan real estate, thereafter in municipal insurance, bonding, and finance, and finally, a third fortune in subway construction. He's also a very astute investor in the business ventures of others, including the Wright brothers. He's also a major backstage player in the political affairs of Tammany Hall, the corrupt organization that controls the Democratic Party in Manhattan. Friedman is really an interesting character, but a fascinating life. He's not a particularly likable person, but there's a lot more to him than what you just would know from reading contemporary sports writer accounts of the Giants' misfortunes during his regime. Friedman always said that his interest stemmed in baseball from his appointment as the receiver of the financially troubled Manhattan Athletic Club. Gary, if I could have the next slide. In the early 1890s, the Manhattan Athletic Club took over the lease for Manhattan Field. The reason I showed you this photograph, this is taken in 1901, the one on the bottom. And you can see the 2 ball diamonds are visible, one from another. A couple of times a week, Friedman would leave his offices in Midtown and take the train up to North Manhattan to check on his charge at Manhattan Field. And he was given to wandering across and checking out the Giants games. And he had no background in baseball, but he was taken by the game. And he had a lot of money and some spare time on his hand, particularly after the Tammany Hall lost the 1894 elections. And so he began investing in the Giants. And come that winter, Eddie Talcott wants to get out and Friedman wants to get in. So for a price, ran differently put between $48,000 and $54,000. Talcott delivers a working majority of Giant stock to Friedman. Now, despite his terrible reputation, at first, this transfer of club ownership was very well received. And even future adversaries like A.G. Spaulding and John Montgomery Ward welcomed the Friedman takeover. He was just what the franchise wanted. He was young. He's only 34 years old. He's Manhattan born. He's politically connected. And most important, he has very deep pockets. New owner Friedman is easily the wealthiest of National League magnates. As a matter of fact, Blanche McGraw later said Friedman had more money than all the other NFL team owners put together. But he also had defects. He was very thin-skinned, easily offended, and pugnacious, not averse to settling grievances with his fists. As a matter of fact, during his time as New York Giants owner, he was actually convicted of assaulting a New York World sports writer, beat the guy up because he didn't like what he'd written in the paper. More detrimentally for all his business acumen. Freedman didn't understand baseball. And he wasn't disposed to heeding advice about it. And he wasn't emotionally invested in the Giants the way the previous owners had been. To him, owning a ball club was like yacht racing or collecting French landscape painting or the opera patronage. It was a hobby, a diversion from the weighty political and business affairs that really dominated his attention. As a result, Freedman alternated bursts of frenetic intrusion into club affairs with long periods of really complete indifference to what was going on. In the beginning, his first season, the Giants, they're expected to contend for a pennant, and they get off to a terrible start. The press is critical, and Freedman reacts by firing Davis, who had assumed the role of player manager, establishing the precedent whereby he'd go through 13 different managers in 8 seasons. He also got into disputes with his players, particularly Amos Rusi, with the umpires, with fellow club owners, and the sports press, particularly the sports press. When Freedman retaliated to the ever-increasing criticism of him and his stewardship, he refused to speak to sports writers. Charles Dryden, then of the New York Journal, retaliated by publishing these make-believe interviews he had with the club boss, which portrayed Freedman, who was a cosmopolitan, articulate man, as a complete ignoramus given to malaprops. The famous one is about a supposed Freedman threat to push Dryden off the edge of an abscess. This image of Freedman as a sort of an uncouth buffoon lingered for the remainder of his time in baseball and continues in certain quarters to this day. Now, during the 8 years of the Freedman regime, the Giants were a pennant contender only once. And that's in 1897, the year that Andrew Freedman spent in Europe and attending to political affairs and totally ignoring the Giants. The following year, he gets back involved in their affairs. And this is when things take a dramatic turn for the worse. That summer, there had been an incident at the Polo Grounds whereby a former Giants player named Ducky Holmes had uttered a very loud anti-Semitic slur directed at Freedman. Holmes was thereafter suspended by the league, but in time, he filed a grievance and the National League lifted the suspension. Freedman resented this enormously. He was a very proud man, and he took the league action as nothing less than condemnation of a gross personal insult, and he wasn't having it. His way of revenging himself upon his fellow team owners took the form of placing a Giants team on the field that was so bad that nobody wanted to watch it. This was catastrophic to particularly the small market teams like Cincinnati or St. Louis or Washington. They depended on the Giants bringing big crowds to their home games and getting a healthy slice of games that they played at the Polo Grounds. But Freedman, in retaliation, he put such lousy teams on the field that nobody wanted to watch them. And as a result, the attendance, both home and away, for Giant games just contracted to the point where it was really hurting these other clubs. Now, Freedman's a very rich man. I mean, he's not a plutocrat. He's not a Vanderbilt or a Rockefeller, but he's far richer than these other guys. He's a dilettante. This is something he does periodically to amuse himself, running the New York Giants. These other fellas, they need to make money. They're sportsmen, but they can't afford to run their teams indefinitely at a loss. So by 1900, they're thrown in the towel, and they're going to give in to various Freedman demands. One of the things that happens coincidentally is a rapprochement between Freedman and John T. Brush, then principal owner of the Cincinnati Reds, and the leader of the Freedman opposition in the National League Owners Councils. They reconcile. And while they'll never become friends, they form a very congenial working relationship for the next few years that lead to all sorts of unhappy events. The two of them will combine. This is not necessarily a bad thing, to eliminate syndicate ownership of teams. Freedman will insist upon contraction of the then 12-team National League into an 8-club league in 1900. They'll be adamant in their opposition to the American League, particularly the American League coming into New York City. The two of them will get together to gut the Baltimore franchise in the American League. And most notoriously, they will be the progenitors of the infamous baseball trust scheme. A lot of this was basically the doing of Brush more than Freedman, because by this time, Freedman, baseball had lost its charm for him. More important, he was engrossed by now into the details of the New York subway project. This project had been dormant for decades. But once Freedman got involved, all of a sudden the project came to life. And over the course of 4 years, this massive and incredibly expensive $35 million project went from the drawing board to reality. And for all his foibles as an owner, it wouldn't happen without Freedman. As a matter of fact, when he died in 1915, the New York Times said that more than any other man, the existence of the New York City subway system was due to Andrew Freedman. Now, by 1902, the Giants are a last place team with a disinterested owner. But John T. Brush has always had his eye on the Giants. He is one of the silent owners. He is one of those who has not relinquished his ownership interest to Freedman. And late in 1902, he sells his interest in the Cincinnati Reds and accepts the position of managing director of the Giants. Then in late September, Freedman sells his interest in the franchise in New York to Brush for about $200,000, or about 4 times what Freedman paid for the club 7 years earlier. Under Brush, Giants are now going to embark upon a decade of success on both the field and the turntiles. And if you can stand it and you'll come back on June the 9th, we'll talk about that then. But thanks for listening. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
First of all, Bill, that was fabulous. I didn't know any of that stuff, let alone the 2 stadiums side by side. I have a question for you that I'm sure you're aware of. Well, I would think you'd be aware of. You mentioned that a lot of the great players came down from Troy.
Yes.
The Troy government up there, council, whatever you want to call it, were very upset that they had left. And they asked the San Francisco Giants in 2011 to rightfully bring that World Series trophy back to Troy. And the Giants actually, I guess to get the final thing off their back, relented. And they brought the trophy. We all went to the trophy tour here in New York. But the Giants brass did bring that trophy to Troy, New York. It's a great story.
That is a great story. I had not known that. And, I guess things came full circle.
I'll send you the article. It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Mars, floor is yours, and then we'll go to Peter. And then Steve King.
Thank you for joining us. That was very, very informative. I love the history of it all. The 2 questions I have are about the diagrams. The one in Central Park, the one to the right, which would be more closer to 6th Avenue, was who played there, the Mets or the Giants? And on the second diagram, uptown, the upper right-hand corner looks like the oval of where the Giants played, and Manhattan Field looks like where the other team played. So can you define that for me?
Okay. Regarding the original grounds, the grounds on Central Park North, the Giants, or the Gothams, I guess they were at the time, they play in the southeast quadrant, the one on the right, I guess, of the diagram. That is the established diagram, the one with the larger grandstand, etc. The Mets are relegated to the field on the left, where they construct a new and separate grandstand. So it's Giants on the right, Mets on the left, I think.
The Giants were on the Fifth Avenue side.
The Giants are on, okay, so the Giants were on the eastern side. Now,
Gary,
what about when they moved
can you post
uptown?
that diagram?
Yeah, hold on a second.
Maybe you post that one up there. I can make sure I'm being clear here.
Hold on.
That one there.
Okay, so the Giants are on the eastern side.
The Giants are over here.
Yes.
The Mets are over here.
Giants are on the Fifth Avenue side. The Mets are on the Sixth Avenue side.
Now, as far as when they moved uptown.
Okay, Gary, if you give us the other diagram or the other thing. This one here?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Giants looks like the oval is where the Giants played, and Manhattan Field. It looks like the oblong figure on the lower left-hand side.
Okay. The one on the lower left-hand side that has the arrow pointed to it says Manhattan Field. That's the new Polo Grounds. This is the first stadium to be built. The next stadium, the one on top of that, that's Brotherhood Field. That becomes Polo Grounds 3. That is the blueprint of the iconic bathtub-shaped Polo Grounds that we all are familiar with.
And this will be where that stadium is. Correct,
yes.
Phil?
Yeah. So the lower left, the oblong figure, that looks like that was where the stairway went down.
Now the stairway is up here.
You know what that is?
Over here.
I don't know if you ever went to the Polo Grounds, but if you did, and particularly if you're coming over from North Jersey, like my dad and I did, where the Manhattan Field is, that's the parking lot.
Parking lot.
That is where you would park. As a matter of fact, if you're going to Yankee Stadium, you would park there, you'd walk up the stairs, cross the McCombs Dam Bridge, and come over to the Yankee Stadium.
All right, so the lower left-hand corner turned out to be the Polo Grounds.
That was that. No, that's not. That's the new Polo Grounds that became Manhattan Field. That was torn down in 1903. And if you went to the Giants games like I did in the 50s, that is where you parked your car.
Okay. So in other words, just to clarify,
yes,
the upper right was where the Giants played up until 1957.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the edification.
Okay. Sure. Mars, the stairs is over here. It leads down.
I can't see the arrow, actually.
It's up on top where it says Coogan's Bluff.
That's not visible to me.
All right.
I can't see an arrow.
Where the shot came from.
Exactly. Where it says Coogan's Bluff up on top of top left of the picture says Coogan's Bluff. That's where the house where the guy got shot, and that's where the stairway is.
Okay. So the lower, again, for clarification, the lower left was where the Giants played, and the upper right was not.
Upper right is the Polo Grounds that you went to.
Okay, that's what I thought, because it's oval.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bill, I'm going to take this off, okay?
Yes, sure.
We have to come back to it, we will. Peter Laskowitz, you're up.
Thank you. Will, are you sure the Troy Haymakers were liquidated after 1882? Because everything I've ever read suggests that the franchise moved to New York. That's a difference that matters to me. Were they liquidated, or did they simply move to New York?
First of all, to be pedantic, it's the Troy Trojans. The Haymakers are the team from the National Association. They are liquidated. They and Worcester are both liquidated. It may have been a matter of economic convenience. These are the two smallest franchises in the National League. The National League wants desperately to move into the National League. Actually, the National League definitely wants to move into New York City. They are not the same teams, because the Giants will also the Gothams will also have players that aren't from Troy. John Montgomery Ward, for example, will come over and play for the Gothams as they were first known. So my view of history is that they are not the same team, rather that the Trojans are liquidated at the same time that the Worcester team is liquidated. The National League then takes these vacant franchises, puts one in Philly and puts the other in Manhattan. That's my reading of history.
Okay. Much appreciated.
Okay.
Stephen King, you're up. Steve, you gotta demute yourself. Unmute.
I know. Hi, Bill. Bill and I have had a number of
Steve.
discussions over the year.
Yeah, how are you?
Andrew Friedman. How are you, Bill?
Good,
and
I'm good. How are you?
We'll get into more about the sale of the brush and controversies regarding that.
You can ask me about Dr. Joseph Creamer.
Okay, we'll discuss him later.
Yeah.
Just the 2 points I want to make about Friedman.
Yeah.
Friedman, as Bill was mentioning, is often very much the object of a great deal of scorn. I think two of the issues Bill mentioned about the issue with Ducky Holmes, the anti-Semitic slur, and the feeling I got from Friedman was this was a Jew in a time of great deal of anti-Semitism, and
no
was
question.
very proud. And I think a lot of that was a lot of the and hatred of him, or reported in the press, was that he fought back against this. And one of the things I thought was interesting was he actually saved Barney Dreyfus's ownership of the Pirates. Barney Dreyfus's co-owners of the Pirates tried to get him out. They owned 51%, he owned 49%. Mm-hmm. And it was Friedman who did a maneuver with a court in Jersey City that got Dreyfus the time to be able to get back the majority ownership of the Pirates. And I have a feeling that probably part of it was because they were both Jews, and that was he looked on it.
I think you and I years ago talked about this. Dreyfus had much more sympathy for Friedman than most of the other owners, and part of it was the fact that he was a fellow Jew. I don't know how observant Friedman was, but he was very prickly about anti-Semitic slurs. Matter of fact, Joe Villa, who was the sports editor or sports reporter, I guess, at the time, the New York Sun, was forever working references to Shylock and other anti-Semitic slurs into his copy about the Giants. And Friedman was furious. He sued the New York Sun 23 times, lost all 23 suits, and he didn't care because he was not going to tolerate it. So when Ducky Holmes slurred him in front of the crowd at the Giants, that was one thing. But then when the National League rescinded that suspension, that he was not having. He was not going to tolerate that. And he administered a rather sobering financial lesson to his fellow owners. And it was all because of his sensitivity to the rampant anti-Semitism that was present at turn of the century America.
And just the other point about Brush, which I know we'll get into more when you come back, just about his selling the Reds. Brush, they hated him in Cincinnati. They had a terrible team in Cincinnati. And in fact, when the new ownership bought it, the Fleischman brothers bought it. In fact, in the Cincinnati papers, they advertised under new ownership now. It was in the middle of the season. They were so happy to get Brush out of Cincinnati. So Brush is sort of this great baseball mind, but they hated him in Cincinnati. They were just so glad to get rid of him, which I think was something to do with, I think there was a whole lot of maneuvering that we'll talk about next time, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, Brush is another very interesting character. He was thoroughly disliked in Cincinnati, not only for putting bad ball clubs on the team, but he refused to move. He was actually a resident of Indianapolis, and he was an absentee owner, and that was thoroughly resented at Cincinnati, the home of the first professional baseball team. His time in Cincinnati was not a happy one. It would be far different in New York, and we'll talk about that next time.
Just to compare that to Barney Dreyfus, who lived in Louisville, and when he got control of the Pirates, he actually moved to Pittsburgh, which was a big difference compared to what that Brush refused to move to Cincinnati.
But he would move to New York as soon as he got control of the team.
Yep, he did that.
All right. Good talking to you, Steve.
Norm, you're up, Norm.
Okay, thank you. First, I just want to thank you for a very informative presentation. A lot of things there that I never knew. So I thank you so much. If you just clarify one more thing for me.
Sure.
My understanding was that Troy and Worcester, when they lost their baseball clubs, were granted that they were going to be considered National League cities from that point on anyway, and they still are right now. Is that correct?
I don't know. I've heard that, but I don't know that it's so. It could be, but I really don't have the answer to that.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
So I don't know if you know or any of the guys, the Giants offices, I saw some stationery. Did it not say the New York Metropolitan organization or company? Does anybody know, like their offices, I think were on 42nd Street, but I remember seeing letterhead, something about the New York Metropolitan team. Am I mistaken on that?
Gary, my understanding is that the original corporate ownership group was the Metropolitan Exhibition Company.
That was
in 1891, it becomes the National Exhibition Company. And that is the moniker it used all the way through 1957, and perhaps even in the beginning in San Francisco. So those are the two names that I know.
That was it. I was mistaken, but thanks for clarifying that. Okay. Anybody else have a question they want to ask Bill while we have him?
I just wanted to point out that they were the National Exhibition Company all the way into the mid-60s.
Okay.
I had no idea. Renee, go ahead.
Yeah, I thank you again. I mean, very, very informative. Wow, learned a lesson not only about the Giants, but a little bit about New York. And with that being said, I mean, his wealth building the New York subway system, that's a phenomenal story. What leads him to that?
Well, I don't want to exaggerate it. He didn't build it. It was privately financed by banks and everything else. What he did was basically get the project up and running. He had his finger in everything, from the siting of subway stops to the procurement of contractors to the design of the railway cars. Whatever was going on, he did. He was a man of frantic energy. As a matter of fact, he eventually had a nervous breakdown and died quite at a relatively young age. But he's the guy that put this long dormant project up on its feet and up and running. Obviously, he didn't do it alone, but the New York Times thought that if you had to single out one person who got the project from the drawing board to reality in 4 years, Andrew Friedman was the one that they named.
Would you compare him, since he started up this whole system, to Robert Moses, who put highways all over the city?
I think the analogy is a very rough one. Moses is a far more important figure in the history of New York City than Andrew Friedman. But Friedman, what I was trying to bring out was the fact that if you read strictly baseball history, he's portrayed as this loathsome, very unfortunate character. Whereas in the larger scheme of things, he was highly respected in the civic, political community and political community of New York City at the turn of the century. His friends ranged from the Republican candidate for president in 1904 to all the big shots, August Belmont, the banker, or Jacob Schiff, the retailer, or R.S. Strauss. All of these men were friendly, if not friends, of Andrew Freedman.
Bill, just to mention his involvement with the Wright brothers to show how important it was. I think it was Wilbur was the president when they incorporated the company. Wilbur was president, Orville was first vice president, Freedman was second vice president. So just to show the level of importance in their business.
Yes, that's true. And that is typical. He had his hand in all sorts of endeavors, railroads, transport, wharfs, shipping. He was a very astute investor in addition to being an entrepreneur in his own right.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question? Peter, go ahead.
I'd like to point out that I believe the legal name of our New York Mets is identical to the legal name of the Giants, which has to do with Mrs. Payson. Mrs. Payson's gopher was M. Donald Grant. That probably has something to do with why the name switched over. If it's not the same, it's very close.
I think, and now I'm stretching my expertise, if you will, but back in the day, it seemed to me when the name was back in '62, it was a head scratcher. New York Mets. Where did that come from? And then I guess someone came to the fact that, hey, this is not the first time that name's been used. Back in the 1880s, there was a team called the Mets. That was a major league team. I mean, that came as news to certainly me, and I suspect to most people. So how informative the previous New York Mets were on the name picking, I don't know, but I remember learning about the original New York Mets back in '62. Where'd this name come from? That's where it came from. At least that's my recollection.
Mrs. Payson wanted them to be the Meadowlarks.
You're kidding.
Newspaper, the headline writers would have nothing to do with that.
Yeah. 4
letters tops.
Yeah.
Peter.
Well, several of the American Association teams, or that when Major League had expansion, like the Brewers and the Nationals, they all came from American Association teams from the 19th century.
Peter?
Yeah, well, franchises in some of the, well, certainly Seattle had a team in the Pacific Coast League from about the turn of the century, but Milwaukee had a team dating back to, I think, the late 1870s in the old Western Association.
Right. I think they were the Brewers. There was the Nationals, the Mets, several other teams. You know, when they expanded, they took on the names of several American Association teams.
Peter, why don't you tell Bill what you do? Because if he's ever in New York, I think, you guys would hook up. Peter, go ahead.
I give classes. Thank you, Gary. I give classes, lectures, and tours of New York City history, often involving baseball.
Oh,
and
great.
I had the privilege of giving a tour or two of the Polo Grounds neighborhood to the members of our Preservation Society. Thank you again for that, Gary.
Okay. It was fabulous.
Gary set us up. Come sometime. I'll show you around.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, what I learned from you was very